My son, rushing to the airport, accidentally grabbed the wrong laptop from the kitchen table. "Dad, can you check this for me? It keeps freezing." He was gone before I could tell him that this one looked different, lighter, newer than his old one. That morning I opened it not expecting anything. Instead, the screen flickered, and a live video from a hidden camera appeared. My own living room, my favorite reading chair being watched from across the room. Then I saw the account name linked to the surveillance system. It was my daughter-in-law's, and I saw a moment that left me speechless. Take a breath with me before we begin. Before we dive in, I'd love if you could drop a comment for me. Is it morning, afternoon, or late night where you are right now? Your presence here truly matters. Quick note, certain details in this story are fictionalized for storytelling purposes. What truly matters is the message and lesson it carries. On the first Monday of October 2024, golden autumn sunlight streamed through the windows of my Beacon Hill mansion like any other ordinary morning in my life, and I didn't know this was the last ordinary morning. At 60 years old, I had spent 35 years as a U.S. federal circuit judge before retiring to this mansion 2 years ago. My life had been measured in gavels and precedent's truth weighed on scales of evidence. That October morning, I stood in my kitchen watching my son prepare for a business trip, feeling the comfortable weight of routine. Pierce, my 35-year-old son, was a chief security architect at one of Boston's premier cybersecurity corporations. He moved through the kitchen with the efficient calm of someone who traveled often, checking his phone, zipping his carry-on drinking coffee, standing up. "Dad," he said, grabbing a laptop from the kitchen counter, sleek, newer than the one he usually carried. "Can you check this for me? It keeps freezing." He tucked it under my arm before I could look closely. I took the laptop, feeling its unfamiliar weight. Something about it felt different, newer, lighter than his usual device. "I'll take a look," I said. He was already turning toward the door. Solene appeared in the doorway, then 33 and radiant even at 7:30 in the morning. My daughter-in-law was a criminal defense attorney whose courtroom skills had always made me proud. She'd been Pierce's wife for 5 years, and I'd watched them build what seemed like a perfect marriage. She crossed to Pierce and kissed him, not a quick goodbye peck, but a long, tender kiss that made me look away out of politeness. "I'll miss you so much," she said. "Be safe, my love." 5 days, Pierce said, touching her face. "I'll be back Friday." I walked them to the front door, the laptop tucked under my arm. Pierce's car waited in the circular drive, his luggage already loaded. I stood on the porch as he pulled away, watching until his BMW disappeared through the iron gates at the end of our tree-lined street. The October air smelled of fallen leaves and wood smoke from someone's early fireplace. I breathed it in, feeling peaceful in the way a man does when his small remaining family feels secure. 3 years ago, I lost my wife Eleanor to what the doctors called sudden cardiac failure. The mansion had felt enormous and empty after her death. Pierce was all I had left, my son, my pride, the only reason these elegant rooms still felt like home. Standing there watching his car disappear, I felt grateful. Grateful he'd found Solene. Grateful he was happy. Grateful I wasn't alone in this big house anymore. I went inside, still holding the laptop. At 9 o'clock, I sat down in my oak-paneled office with my second cup of coffee. Legal volumes lined the shelves around me. 35 years of accumulated precedent, case law, constitutional interpretation. I set the laptop on my desk and opened it, expecting a simple diagnosis. Bad power supply, corrupted hard drive, maybe a virus. I opened Task Manager to check running processes the way any moderately tech-literate person might. The system immediately froze, then crashed. Command line windows popped up in rapid succession, black screens filled with white text scrolling too fast to read. Then I saw it. A window I hadn't opened, a feed I hadn't started, my own face staring back at me from the laptop screen. I went absolutely still. The video was crisp, real-time. I could see myself sitting at my desk, coffee cup in hand, the morning light from my office window catching the gray in my hair. The angle was from across the room, but not my office. I looked at the caption running across the bottom, living room camera live. The feed was pointing at my favorite reading chair in the living room where I sat every evening with my bourbon and case files. The chair was empty now, but the camera had a perfect view of it. My hands, trained by decades of courtroom composure, did not shake. I clicked on the feed properties, checking the security certificate the way Pierce had taught me years ago when he first got into cybersecurity. The certificate registration showed one name, Solene Pennington, my daughter-in-law. Not Pierce's name. Not a household security system registered to both of them. Solene's name alone on a hidden camera watching my living room. I sat back in my chair, my judge's mind immediately shifting into the mode it had occupied for 3.5 decades. Assess, don't assume. Evidence before conclusion. What do you actually know? What I knew. There was a camera in my living room. It was registered to Solene. Pierce's laptop had revealed it accidentally through a system crash that must have exposed processes he never knew were running. What I didn't know, everything else. 35 years on the bench taught me one thing above all others: never search without cause, never proceed without standing, never trespass on evidence you're not authorized to see. But this was my home, my son's laptop, my daughter-in-law's secret surveillance. I closed the window and stared at the screen. The laptop sat there innocently, its worn keyboard and scratched case giving no hint of what it concealed. Pierce had handed it to me as casually as someone passing salt at dinner. A simple favor: fix my old laptop, Dad. The irony would have been funny if my heart weren't beating so hard. I looked at my face in the reflection of the dark screen, an old man with gray hair and careful eyes, someone who'd spent his life weighing evidence and rendering judgment. Now I was looking at myself the way that hidden cameras saw me every evening, alone, vulnerable, watched. Soline's name glowed in my memory like an accusation. The first question wasn't why. The only question that mattered in that moment, was simpler and more terrifying. Is this the only camera? I sat motionless in my office, the morning sunlight now feeling less like warmth and more like exposure. Somewhere in this house, Soline was probably getting ready for work, perhaps in the bedroom she shared with my son, unaware that her surveillance system had just betrayed itself. I needed to know the answer before I did anything else. Before I called anyone, before I confronted anyone, before I made any decision that couldn't be unmade. How many cameras was I living with, and what else had my daughter-in-law been watching? I sat still in front of the screen long enough for my heart to return to normal rhythm. Then I reached for the router. I didn't open Soline's files. I didn't dig through hidden folders or decrypt anything that required authorization. I simply pulled up the router's connected device list, information anyone living in this house could access legally. The list loaded. 5 camera devices, each with a timestamp showing continuous connection for the past 6 months. Living room, hallway, garage, kitchen, and my bedroom. My bedroom. The room where I'd sat beside Eleanor through her final months of cardiac failure, where I'd held her hand the night she died, where I still kept her reading glasses on the nightstand 3 years later, unable to put them away, where I'd grieved alone in the darkness thinking I had privacy. All of it watched. I picked up my phone and called the only person I trusted. Come here immediately. Floyd Rawlings didn't ask questions. 40 years of friendship meant 3 words carried the weight of a full explanation. Floyd Rawlings, 63 and retired from the FBI's cybercrimes division, had been my closest friend for 40 years, the kind of friendship forged in courtrooms and crime scenes where a 3-word phone call carried more meaning than most people's hour-long conversations. He appeared at my door 38 minutes later. I heard his car in the driveway, the familiar sound of his old Volvo that he refused to replace despite his FBI pension. I opened the door before he knocked. He carried a black equipment bag I recognized from dozens of cases we'd worked together over the years, him gathering digital evidence, me signing warrants. He looked at me, then at the laptop still open on my desk, then back at me. No words for 30 seconds. He was reading the situation the way he'd done for 25 years at the FBI, assessing threat level, calculating risk, processing options. Kitchen or office, he asked. Office. We worked in absolute silence. This was the trust that only comes after 4 decades. I made coffee in the small pot I kept on my credenza. Floyd unpacked his equipment, forensic laptop cable adapters, external drives with evidence-grade write protection. He connected everything to Pierce's laptop with the methodical precision of someone who'd testified in federal court about chain of custody thousands of times. I set his coffee beside him. Black, no sugar, same as always. He didn't look up. His fingers moved across the keyboard, running diagnostic tools I recognized from years of watching him work. Command prompts scrolled. Data trees expanded. File systems mapped themselves in cascading windows. I stood at the window looking out at my front lawn. October leaves scattered across the grass. A neighbor walked a dog. Everything outside looked normal, peaceful, unchanged. Inside, my life was being quietly dissected by the one person I knew could do it right. 20 minutes passed. Floyd's typing never slowed, never hesitated. He was following a trail through the laptop system architecture, pulling threads that would unravel whatever Soline had hidden there. The office smelled like coffee and old books, familiar scents that usually brought comfort. Today they felt like set dressing for a theater I hadn't known I was performing in. Dodge. The cameras are just the surveillance layer, Floyd said without looking up. Pierce's laptop wasn't crashing because of a power supply or hard drive problem. It was crashing because of software conflicts. The laptop was fighting itself. This isn't Pierce's laptop, Floyd said, looking up from the screen. The registry, the software fingerprint, this machine belongs to Soline. Pierce grabbed hers by mistake this morning, and when the system crashed, it exposed everything she'd been running on it. Solon, I said. The certificate registrations say yes. His fingers kept moving. But I need to go deeper. There's a second layer here. Encrypted. I watched him work. 40 years meant I knew when to stay quiet. Floyd's face had settled into the expression I'd seen in 100 crime scenes, focused, methodical, following evidence wherever it led, regardless of who it implicated. Another 10 minutes passed. The coffee grew cold. Neither of us drank it. Floyd stopped typing. His hands froze over the keyboard. Then he turned to look at me with eyes I'd seen only twice before, once when he told me Eleanor's cancer had metastasized once at her funeral. Russell, he said. My name, not Russ, like he usually called me. I straightened from the window. What did you find? Are you going to sit down? I stayed standing. Show me. I need you to sit down first. I'd known this man for 40 years. Through his 2 divorces and Eleanor's death. Through cases that broke other men, sent them into early retirement or alcoholism or both. Through late nights and early mornings, through crime scenes that made younger agents vomit. Floyd had stood beside me through all of it with the same steady competence he brought to every investigation. He'd never asked me to sit down before. I moved to the leather chair beside my desk. My hands gripped the armrests. The leather was cool under my palms, worn smooth from years of use. Tell me, I said. Floyd looked back at the screen. His knuckles were white against the edge of my desk. He clicked something and I heard the distinctive sound of files decrypting, a progress bar appearing, filling slowly from left to right. There are financial documents, he said quietly, insurance files, encrypted correspondence with someone using an anonymized email server, and technical schematics for something I need a specialist to identify. The progress bar reached 50%. Floyd's jaw tightened. The cameras aren't just watching you, he continued. They're recording, time-stamped, date-stamped, stored on a remote server. Your bedroom, your office, your conversations, 6 months of footage. 75%. But that's not the worst part. I felt my hands tighten on the armrests. The progress bar reached 100%. A folder opened on the screen, dozens of files, each with clinical naming conventions that meant nothing to me, but clearly meant something to Floyd. He turned the laptop slightly toward me, enough that I could see the screen, but not enough that it felt like an accusation. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed him. I'd seen Floyd maintain composure through crime scenes that made hardened detectives weep. I'd watched him testify about child murders without his voice cracking. But now, sitting in my office on a quiet October morning, his hands were shaking. Russell, he said, I think Solene is planning to kill Pierce. Floyd took almost 2 hours to decode the first layer, and when the final file opened, I understood why he'd told me to sit down. Life and accident insurance, Floyd said quietly. Purchased 6 months ago through a New York broker. Pierce Pennington, age 35, beneficiary Solene Pennington. Standard payout $5 million, special clause here. He tapped the screen. Payout doubles to $10 million if death occurs due to traffic accident or poisoning. $10 million. I leaned forward to see the document more clearly. Official letterhead, policy number, legal language I'd read 1,000 times in estate cases. Everything looked legitimate except for one detail that made my stomach turn. The signature, I said. Floyd zoomed in on the last page. Pierce's distinctive scrawl, the way he looped the P, the quick slash through the second N in Pennington. It was his signature, no question. Page 47, Floyd said. I stared at the document. 47 pages. The signature appeared alone on the final page, buried in a stack so thick most people would skim to the end and sign. I recognize that format, I said. Marital financial review, they do them annually. Insurance, assets, estate planning, lawyers, families. I used to do them with Eleanor. Floyd nodded. Pierce is a cybersecurity architect, smart, careful, detail-oriented in his professional life, but at home, signing documents his attorney wife prepared, he trusted her. He signed without reading every page. I'd signed thousands of financial documents in my life, budgets, mortgages, case settlements. Every signature represented trust. Pierce trusted Solene enough to sign 47 pages without reading carefully. That trust would have killed him. $10 million, I said. That's the price she put on my son's head. Floyd pulled up another file. There's more. The second file took another hour to decrypt. I watched the progress bar fill while drinking coffee that had gone cold. Outside my office window, afternoon sunlight slanted through the trees. A beautiful October day. The kind that makes Boston feel like the center of civilization, old money and older trees, history and stability. Inside, I was watching my daughter-in-law's blueprint for murder. The file opened. Not a single document this time, but a browser history log pulled from deep in the laptop's deleted files. Timestamps, URLs, downloaded documents. Floyd scrolled slowly, letting me read. Tesla Model S brake system diagram downloaded. Dark web forum thread. Remote vehicle access without physical modification saved. Encrypted messaging app installation logged. Conversation transcript. Need Bluetooth exploit for Tesla brake override. No physical access. Timeline 6 to 8 weeks. The conversation was dated 4 months ago. She didn't do this herself, Floyd said. She researched it, learned what was possible, then reached out to someone who could execute it. Look at the timestamps. 2:17 a.m., 2:43 a.m., 3:22 a.m., 4:01 a.m. She did this research while Pierce slept beside her, I said. Floyd nodded. Every entry is between 2 and 4 in the morning, multiple nights across 3 weeks. This wasn't curiosity. This was technical preparation by someone planning to hire an expert. I felt my hands grip the armrests harder. Pierce drives a Tesla. Model S 2022. I saw it in the driveway when I arrived. He drives it every morning, down Beacon Hill onto I-93 through the mountain pass. I saw it then not as evidence on a screen, but as reality. Pierce's Tesla, the I-93 curve where the highway cuts through the hills east of Boston. The curve with the 70-foot drop on the eastern side, the one where tourists always slow down to admire the view and locals accelerate because they've driven it 1,000 times. No survivors. Just a tragic accident, a cybersecurity executive who should have known better about car security, an investigation that would find brake failure, maybe recall the vehicle model, blame Tesla's engineering, and a widow collecting $10 million. This wasn't an impulse, Floyd said. 6 months ago, she set up the insurance policy. 4 months ago, she started researching the method. The timestamps show steady, methodical planning. She's been patient. When? I asked. When was she planning to do it? Floyd scrolled further. The encrypted conversation ends 3 weeks ago. Last message from the unknown contact. System ready. Activation on your signal. Remote trigger via phone app. No physical trace. 3 weeks ago. The system was already in place. Pierce's Tesla was already compromised. Every time he got in that car, Solene could trigger the brake failure remotely. She just hadn't pulled the trigger yet. I looked at the clock on the wall, 2:47 in the afternoon. Pierce was on a plane somewhere over the Midwest flying to San Francisco. He'd be there for 5 days, client meetings, hotel stays, rental cars. Safe. But in 5 days, he'd fly home. He'd call from the airport. Solene would tell him she missed him. He'd take an Uber to our mansion in Beacon Hill, walk through the front door, kiss his wife, sleep in his bed. And the next morning, he'd get into that Tesla and drive to work. Does she control when the brakes fail? I asked. Floyd pointed to the last line of the conversation. Remote trigger via phone app. She chooses the moment. So she's waiting for something, the right time, the right circumstances. Or she's already decided and just hasn't pressed the button yet. I stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the peaceful street. My neighbor was raking leaves. 2 houses down, someone was putting up early Halloween decorations. Normal life continuing without any idea what was happening in my oak-paneled office. Floyd, I said, what do I do? He didn't answer immediately. When I turned around, he was looking at me with the expression I'd seen in dozens of cases, the moment when evidence becomes action, when investigation becomes intervention. You can't tell Pierce, he said, not yet. Why not? Because if you tell him, he'll confront Solene, and if he confronts her, one of 3 things happens. She denies everything and destroys evidence we don't have copies of yet. She moves up her timeline and triggers the brake failure immediately. Or, he stopped. Or what? Or she has a backup plan we haven't found yet. I looked back at the laptop at the screen full of evidence that my daughter-in-law was planning to murder my son. 5 days. That's how long Pierce would be safe in California. 5 days to find out what else Solene had prepared 5 days before my son came home and got into that car. I didn't know how many days her plan allowed before she activated it. But I knew one thing, I had to find out what else she'd prepared. Floyd didn't stop at those 2 files, he kept digging deeper, and what he found next made me realize everything had been planned long before I picked up the laptop this morning. Second hidden partition, Floyd said at 4 o'clock. Only accessible because the system crash damaged the encryption. Private detective reports dating back 6 months. I read over his shoulder. Subject Russell Pennington. Daily schedule. Morning walk 6:45 a.m. Coffee on Charles Street. 7:30 a.m. Home by 8:15 a.m. Evening routine reading chair bourbon case files until 10 p.m. List of frequent visitors. Floyd Rawlings, 17 visits in 6 months. Notation. Former FBI Cybercrimes Division Specialist. Retired 2019. Maintains forensic analysis equipment. She'd been watching me for 6 months. Every morning I walked to the coffee shop thinking about Eleanor. Every evening I sat in that reading chair with my bourbon. Every moment I believed I was alone grieving privately, someone was writing it down in a report. And she'd identified Floyd before ever committing a crime. She'd mapped out who I would turn to if I discovered her plan. She anticipated this, I said. She knew from the beginning that if you found evidence, you'd call me, Floyd said. She researched both of us. This wasn't just planning murder, this was planning for discovery. I walked to the window. October shadows stretched long across Beacon Hill. Everything looked peaceful. How long had she been planning this? I said. 6 months of surveillance. 3 months since. I stopped. A memory surfaced. A quiet evening in July. 3 months ago, Solene asked me a question, I said. What kind of question? About evidence admissibility. She asked if evidence taken from someone's personal device without a warrant would be rejected by the court. Floyd went very still. I answered her thoroughly, I continued. I was proud my lawyer daughter-in-law wanted to learn constitutional law. I explained the exclusionary rule fruit of the poisonous tree Fourth Amendment protections. I told her exactly what legal weaknesses I'd face if I took evidence without proper authorization. She was preparing her defense, Floyd said, 3 months in advance. She wasn't asking to learn. She was asking to know what legal weapons I'd have if I discovered this. Floyd's expression hardened into something I'd seen in his FBI days when a case went from complex to personal. You just told me she prepared her defense 3 months in advance, he said. She's not just planning murder, she's planning to get away with it. I looked at the clock, 6:45 p.m. She'll be expecting me for dinner, I said. Can you do it? Sit across from her and act normal? I spent 35 years as a federal judge. Half my job was keeping my face neutral while listening to testimony that made me want to rage or weep. That was strangers. This is your daughter-in-law. Then I'll have to be a better actor than I was a judge. Floyd packed his equipment. Before he left, he gripped my shoulder. Don't underestimate her, he said. She's been watching you for 6 months. She knows your tells. I don't have tells. Everyone has tells, even judges. He left through the back entrance, taking the laptop with him. I walked to the dining room. Selene was setting the table. She looked up when I entered, smiled that warm smile I'd seen 1,000 times. Simple dress hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked like family, like home. Did you figure out what's wrong with Pierce's laptop, Dad? She asked. He'll be so grateful if you fixed it. 35 years in federal court taught me to control every muscle in my face. I smiled and answered as if nothing had changed. Still working on it, I said. Might need a few more days. Of course, take your time. She placed a plate before me. Roasted chicken vegetables, the meal smelling rich and seasoned. I made your favorite. I sat down. She sat across from me the way we'd sat dozens of times since Eleanor died, just family sharing a meal. Except now I knew she'd been surveilling me, planning to murder my son, researching how to defeat me if I discovered her. How was your day? She asked. Quiet. Yours. A client meeting this afternoon. Insurance fraud case. Fascinating how people think they can lie to investigators. The irony was so perfect it felt like performance. Maybe it was. Maybe she knew I'd found the laptop and this was her testing me, watching for my reaction. I cut into the chicken, brought a piece to my mouth. I couldn't eat it. Not from fear, I wasn't worried she'd poison me. Her plan required Pierce's death to look accidental insurance payout clean and legitimate. My death would complicate everything. I couldn't eat because for the first time in 60 years, I was sitting at my own table lying to someone I'd invited into my family, and I realized every meal she'd prepared in this house had been a performance too. Solene looked at me with concern in her eyes, perfect, practiced concern that would have fooled anyone who hadn't spent the day discovering she was a murderer. Don't you like it, Dad? I forced a smile that felt like glass cutting my face. Just a little tired, honey. That was the first time in 60 years I'd lied to someone sitting at my own table. The first time I'd had to perform normalcy while drowning in horror. The first time I'd looked at family and seen a predator. And I knew it wouldn't be the last, because Pierce returned in 5 days. And between now and then, I had to figure out how to save my son without Solene knowing I was moving against her. Which meant every meal, every conversation, every moment we shared in this house would be a lie. Solene touched my hand across the table. You work too hard, she said gently. Even in retirement, let yourself rest. Her hand was warm, real. The same hand that had researched Tesla brake hacks at 2 a.m. while Pierce slept beside her. You're right, I said. I should rest. I took a bite of the chicken, forced myself to chew, to swallow, to smile. And across the table, Selene smiled back, neither of us knowing which performance was better. On Wednesday morning, 2 days after discovering the truth, I took the first step in my plan, a blow that didn't require legal action, only psychological manipulation. Vaughn Castillo, 65, and my estate planning attorney for over 20 years arrived at precisely 10 a.m. carrying the leather briefcase I'd seen in countless meetings today. It would help me stage the most important legal performance of my career. Thank you for coming on short notice, I said, leading him to my office. Of course, Russell. You mentioned reviewing your will. I left the office door slightly ajar. Not wide open, that would be suspicious. Just enough that sound would carry to the hallway. Through the decorative mirror on my office wall, I could see into the hallway. Solene was arranging flowers on the table the way she did every Wednesday morning. Casual, domestic, completely natural. Except I knew she was listening. "I've thought about it carefully," I said, my voice louder than necessary. "In 1 month, I will officially change the will. I want to donate most of my estate to a charitable foundation to build an orphanage for abandoned children." Vaughn, to his credit, didn't even blink. I'd briefed him on the phone yesterday, told him only that I needed to stage a conversation for strategic purposes, legal but sensitive. 20 years of attorney-client trust meant he didn't ask questions. "That's a very noble idea, Mr. Pennington," he said in his professional baritone. "I'll prepare the documents immediately. What percentage of your assets do you wish to allocate?" "At least 80%. The mansion, the property's investment portfolio, everything. I want to leave a meaningful legacy." In the mirror, I watched Celine's hands pause over the flowers. 3 seconds. Her fingers frozen on a stem, not moving, not arranging. Then she resumed as if nothing had happened. 35 years on the federal bench taught me this. The best legal trap isn't built with evidence, it's built with fear. Make someone believe they're losing everything, and they'll show you exactly what they're willing to do to keep it. Vaughn and I spent another 20 minutes discussing fictitious details. Foundation structure, trustee appointments, timeline for transfer. All of it completely legal, completely plausible, completely designed to be overheard. When he left, I watched through the window as his car pulled away. Then I sat at my desk and waited. If I was right about Solene, if she was planning Pierce's death to inherit our family estate, then she'd just learned her target had moved. Pierce's death would gain her nothing if I donated everything to charity first. Which meant she had 3 choices: abandon the plan, wait for me to die naturally, or accelerate Pierce's murder before I could sign the new will. I was betting on option 3. At 11 p.m. that night, my secure phone rang. Floyd. 3 hours after you staged that will meeting, she moved $100,000 in cryptocurrency to an unknown wallet, he said. I traced it. I sat up in bed. Where? 36-year-old freelance programmer. Boston. Name is Conrad Travers. The name hit me like cold water. Say that again. Conrad Travers, age 36. Works freelance, mostly security consulting, but his digital footprint shows activity on forums where the Tesla brake exploit was discussed. This is your hacker. Conrad Travers. The name kept swirling in my head like something that had once sat in an old case file on my bookshelf. Not immediate recognition, but not completely unfamiliar either. You still there? Floyd asked. I know that name, I said. I don't remember from where, but I know it. From the bench. Maybe. I need to check my old case files. 3 hours. That's how long it took between my staged announcement and Solene hiring someone to kill my son. $100,000. That's what she was willing to pay to speed up Pierce's death before I could sign that will. The fake will announcement had worked better than I'd hoped. Instead of making her cautious, it made her desperate. Desperate enough to move money immediately to accelerate the timeline to leave a digital trail Floyd could trace. When's the hit? I asked. Unknown. The cryptocurrency transfer just confirms payment. Communication between them is probably happening through encrypted channels I can't access yet. But if she paid that much, she's expecting it soon. Pierce comes back Friday, 3 days from now. I looked at the clock. 11:17 p.m. Wednesday night. Pierce would fly home Friday afternoon, sleep at the mansion Friday night, drive that Tesla Saturday morning. Can you disable the Tesla remotely? I asked. Make it undrivable. Not without Pierce noticing, and if he notices, he'll ask questions. If he asks questions, Solene will know I found the laptop. Floyd was silent for a moment. Russell, we need to bring in the FBI. Official. Not just me helping an old friend. This is conspiracy to commit murder. No, I said, not yet. Why not? Because I need to know who Conrad Travers is. Why that name sounds familiar. If I knew him once, there's a reason Solene chose him specifically. What kind of reason? The kind that explains why this isn't just about money. I put the phone down and sat still in the dark office. The name Floyd had just spoken kept circling in my mind, Conrad Travers, like something that had once been filed in that oak cabinet against the wall in one of those case folders from my years on the bench. I stood up and walked to the cabinet, pulled open the drawer marked 2015 to 2017. My fingers moved through manila folders, each one a case I'd presided over, each one a verdict I'd rendered. Hundreds of names, thousands of decisions, 35 years of justice measured in paper and ink. Conrad Travers had to be in here somewhere. And I wouldn't sleep until I found where I'd heard that name before. Because Floyd was right, if Solene had chosen this specific hacker out of all the criminals in Boston, there was a reason. And that reason might be the key to understanding what she was really planning. I pulled the first file from 2016 and began reading. Somewhere in these pages was a connection I'd forgotten, a verdict I'd handed down, a defendant I'd acquitted or convicted, someone whose path had crossed mine in that courtroom, someone who remembered me enough that Celine thought they'd be willing to kill my son. I found the file at midnight, and when I opened it, I understood that this story didn't begin with yesterday's laptop discovery. United States versus Conrad Travers, 2016. Charge unauthorized access to federal banking systems, $8 million in losses. Verdict acquitted, not because he was innocent, because the FBI's digital evidence collection had violated Fourth Amendment protocols. The case had been solid, Conrad had done it, but the evidence couldn't be admitted. I'd been the one to read that verdict, the one to set him free on procedural grounds. How many verdicts had I read in 35 years? Hundreds. Thousands. How many defendants had looked at me with rage or disappointment? I'd lost count. But Conrad Travers, I remembered him now, because he was the only one who promised he'd make me remember. When I read the acquittal that day in 2016, he didn't smile or celebrate. He just looked at me. Direct eye contact across the courtroom, holding my gaze for 3 seconds that felt like 30. Then he said it just loud enough for me to hear, but not the court stenographer, "You will remember me." I'd thought it was a loser's threat. Empty words. I'd forgotten about it within a month. But Conrad hadn't forgotten. I called Floyd at 1 a.m. He arrived 20 minutes later. We sat in my office, the case file open between us. "You thought it was a threat," Floyd said after reading. "It wasn't. It was a promise." "How did Celine find him?" "She's a criminal defense attorney. She knows people who know people. If she asked around for someone with technical skills and a personal grudge against you, Conrad's name would come up. So this is revenge. Revenge with a $100,000 bonus. He gets paid and gets to hurt you by killing your son." I looked at the clock. 2:17 a.m., Thursday morning. Pierce would be home tomorrow. "We need to bring in the FBI," Floyd said. "Official. Today." By afternoon, we were sitting in a closed conference room at the FBI Boston field office in Chelsea. Supervisory Special Agent Mercer Whitaker, 50 years old, with the measured demeanor of someone who'd built hundreds of federal cases, led the investigation with the kind of methodical precision I recognized from my own decades on the bench. Floyd and I presented at everything: the surveillance cameras, the insurance policy with Pierce's signature on page 47, the Tesla brake hacking research, the cryptocurrency transfer to Conrad. Whitaker reviewed each document with careful attention, made notes, asked clarifying questions, never rushed. When we finished, he sat back. First, he said, the FBI will obtain legal surveillance warrants before gathering any additional evidence. Everything must be admissible and stand firm in federal court. I nodded. After Conrad's case in 2016, I understood why that mattered. Second, Whitaker continued, Conrad Travers connects to an international hacking network. We've been monitoring parts of that network for 2 years. If we arrest him today, your daughter-in-law can hire a replacement from the same network within 48 hours. So we can't move on Conrad yet, Floyd said. Not until we've mapped his full communications. That takes time. How much time? I asked. 3 to 5 days minimum. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Pierce comes home tomorrow. I know, Whitaker said. Which brings me to the third point. He looked directly at me. You have to continue living normally in that house next to her until we have enough evidence. The room was silent. I understand, I said. Do you... Whitaker leaned forward. Your daughter-in-law is planning to murder your son. The trigger could be activated at any time, and you have to go home tonight, sit across from her at dinner, and act like you know nothing. I'd spent 35 years in courtrooms where the rules were clear, the procedures sacred, the outcomes final. Now I was entering a different kind of courtroom, one where the judge had to pretend he knew nothing while sitting across the dinner table from a woman planning murder. I've done that for 35 years on the bench, I said, maintaining absolute control while the truth slowly revealed itself. That was in a courtroom. This is your kitchen. I know. Whitaker studied me the way I'd once studied witnesses to determine if they could handle testimony pressure. We'll have surveillance on your house starting tonight, he said. Visual, audio, digital. If anything goes wrong, we'll move immediately. But until then, I maintain the performance. I stood up. Floyd stood with me. We shook hands with Whitaker and walked out into the October afternoon. Floyd dropped me at the corner of my street. You don't have to do this, he said. We could bring Pierce directly to the FBI when he lands tomorrow. Protective custody. And Celine would know immediately that I found the laptop. She'd destroy evidence, claim ignorance, hire lawyers. We'd never prove premeditation. Better than losing Pierce. We're not going to lose Pierce. The FBI will have surveillance. You'll be monitoring. I'll be watching her every second. Russell. I spent 35 years learning how to read people, Floyd. Liars, killers, manipulators. I can handle one more performance. I got out and walked to my front door. The mansion looked exactly as it always did. Beautiful, historic, peaceful, home. I opened the door and stepped inside. Celine was in the kitchen making dinner. She looked up when I entered and smiled. "You're home late," she said. "Everything okay?" I smiled back. 35 years of judicial control keeping every muscle in my face exactly where it needed to be. "Just had some errands to run with Floyd," I said. "Everything's fine." And the hardest performance of my life began. The next morning, Floyd called with FBI technical analysis that made the timeline even more impossible than I'd feared. "FBI tech analysis came back," he said. "Conrad's server connects to an international hacker network, servers in 7 countries. If we catch him today, she hires a replacement within 48 hours. I sat at my desk, the morning light cold through the window. "How long does FBI need?" 3 to 5 more days to map the network before they can move, but Pierce returns tomorrow, Friday, October 11th. I looked at the calendar on the wall. My son could be home and behind the wheel of that Tesla before the FBI finished mapping a network halfway around the world. "We need to tell Pierce," I said. "Whitaker agrees, but not on any phone that can be traced. I'm bringing you a secure device this afternoon." How do you tell a man his wife wants him dead? How do you explain that the person who kisses him goodbye each morning has been researching how to hack his car's brakes at 2 a.m. while he sleeps beside her? I spent the day moving through my house like a ghost, maintaining the performance. Nodding when Celine spoke, smiling when expected, every gesture calculated, every word measured. That evening at dinner, Celine recounted her workday casually. A difficult client meeting, a brief filed late, the ordinary complaints of a criminal defense attorney's ordinary Thursday. Then midway through her pasta, she mentioned it. "Oh, Dad, Pierce texted his meeting ended early. He's coming home Friday instead of Sunday. Isn't that wonderful?" I looked up from my plate, arranged my face into pleased surprise. "That's great news, honey. I've missed having him around." "Me too," she said, smiling. "I can't wait to see him." That text was sent to her 20 minutes ago. I knew because Floyd had given me the FBI's monitoring access that afternoon. I'd watched the message appear on the surveillance feed. Pierce had sent it only to Celine, not to me. She was reading my son's messages in real time. Spyware. On Pierce's phone, the cybersecurity expert who should have detected it, who would have detected it if he'd been looking at his personal device with professional eyes, hadn't thought to check. Because why would he? His wife was a lawyer, not a hacker. She knew exactly what time he'd land, which route he'd take home, which car he'd drive. "When does his flight get in?" I asked. "Tomorrow afternoon, around 3. I smiled. "I'll make sure we have his favorite dinner ready." "That would be lovely, Dad." She touched my hand across the table. Warm. Genuine. The same hand that had arranged his murder. I went to bed early that night. Lay in the darkness listening to the house settle around me. FBI surveillance equipment hummed somewhere in the walls, recording everything. Floyd was watching. Whitaker was watching. A team of federal agents monitoring every word, every movement. But tomorrow morning I had to make a call they couldn't help me with. I woke at 5 a.m., dressed in my usual walking clothes, slacks, sweater, comfortable shoes. The routine I'd maintained for 3 years since Eleanor died. At 6 o'clock, I stepped out the front door with Floyd's secure phone in my pocket. Walked my usual route through Beacon Hill toward the small park 2 blocks away. The October morning air smelled of wet leaves and coming winter. I sat on my usual bench, pulled out the secure phone, called Pierce. He answered on the second ring. "Dad." Pierce listened carefully. "Don't speak, don't react, just listen." Silence. "Your wife is trying to kill you. She's hired someone to hack your Tesla's brakes. The FBI is involved. I need you to trust me completely." The silence stretched so long I thought the connection had dropped. Then, "Dad, I understand, right? My wife is trying to kill me." His voice broke on the last word. There are moments in a father's life that define everything: the day your son is born, the day you teach him to drive, the day you sit in a federal courtroom for his college graduation. This morning in a Boston park was another, the day I asked my son to trust me with his life. "Yes," I said, "and I need you to follow the steps I give you without asking why. Can you do that?" Another long silence. I could hear him breathing. Imagined him in a San Francisco hotel room trying to process what I'd just told him. "I trust you, Dad." 3 words, the most important 3 words he'd ever spoken to me. "The FBI will meet you at the airport when you land. Federal agents will intercept you before you reach baggage claim. They'll take you to a secure location. Don't come home. Don't get into that Tesla. Don't call Celine. Do exactly what the FBI tells you." Okay. Pierce. "I trust you, Dad. I'll do exactly what you said." I sat on that bench after hanging up, watching autumn leaves fall onto the still water of the pond. My son had just given me the most precious thing a person can give: absolute trust. I couldn't afford to be wrong. Not about this, not about him. Everything now depended on what happened in the next 24 hours. That afternoon, while Celine was out shopping, the FBI went into the garage, and what the technicians found in Pierce's Tesla made Floyd grab my arm to hold me back. Not just the software hack, the FBI technician said, straightening up from under the car. There's a physical device installed directly into the brake line, installed about 2 weeks ago. I stared at the small metal box the technician held up. Wires, circuit board, something that looked like it belonged in a bomb, not a car. Device plus remote command, Floyd said, his hand still gripping my arm. Brakes go completely dead, irreversible. Every time Pierce got into this car for the past 2 weeks, he was sitting on a trigger. 2 weeks. Not 2 days, not 2 hours, 2 weeks that device had been sitting there. Pierce drove to work. Pierce drove to meetings. Pierce drove to get groceries on a Tuesday evening. Every single trip could have been the one where Conrad sent the signal and my son died on I-93. I lunged toward the car. Floyd's grip tightened, pulled me back. Not now, he said quietly. We remove it, replace it with a safe replica. She won't know the difference when she gets home. I stood there breathing hard while FBI technicians worked with the precision of surgeons. My best friend had to hold me back because I was about to destroy the only evidence that could save my son. 20 minutes later, they'd installed an identical-looking device, same size, same placement, completely harmless. When Celine came home and checked the garage as I knew she would, she'd see exactly what she expected to see. Agent Whitaker appeared in the garage doorway. Tomorrow morning, he said. Logan Airport. We'll intercept Pierce at the secure arrival gate. He won't set foot outside federal custody until this is over. I nodded. That night I lay awake, listening to Celine sleep in the room down the hall, listening to the house settle, knowing that somewhere in these walls the FBI was recording every sound. At dawn I dressed and left for the airport. Boston. Logan at 9 a.m. on a Saturday morning, families returning from vacations, business travelers heading home, the ordinary flow of ordinary lives. I stood in the secure arrival area with Floyd and Agent Whitaker watching the gate. Pierce walked out at 9:43, still in his work suit, still pulling his suitcase, still looking like the chief security architect I'd always been proud of. But his eyes were different. Knowledge does that. We locked gazes across the 20 feet of airport corridor. Neither of us spoke. I've had 3 defining moments as a father: the day Pierce was born, the day I watched him graduate from MIT, and this morning in an airport watching the FBI prepare to drive him away to save his life. Sometimes protecting your child means letting him go. Pierce walked toward us, stopped 5 feet away. I'm ready, he said. Not a question, not a plea, just a statement of fact. We didn't hug, not the right time, not the right place, but I put my hand on his shoulder for 1 second. 1 second to say everything I couldn't speak aloud. Then Agent Whitaker gestured toward the exit. Pierce nodded, picked up his suitcase, walked toward the door where 2 FBI agents waited. I watched him go. Watched him get into the black SUV with federal plates. Watched the vehicle pull away from the curb and merge into airport traffic. My son was safe. That was all that mattered. Floyd stood beside me at the window. He'll be secure within 30 minutes, he said. Safe house, full protection, no communication with the outside world until this is over. How long? Whitaker says 3 days, maybe 4, until they've mapped Conrad's network and can move on everyone simultaneously. 3 or 4 days. 3 or 4 days of maintaining the performance while Celine waited for Pierce to come home. She's going to call, I said. When I get home, she'll ask where Pierce is. Tell her his flight was delayed. Mechanical issue. He'll be home tonight. And tonight, tell her he decided to stay another day for additional meetings. By day 3, we'll have enough to move. I turned from the window. The FBI car carrying Pierce had disappeared into Boston traffic. As the FBI car disappeared down the airport access road, I turned back toward my own car. Ahead of me was the drive back to Beacon Hill, back to the mansion, back to the woman sitting at the breakfast table waiting to hear that her husband had arrived home safely. Every piece was now in position. Pierce was secure. The Tesla's device was documented and replaced. FBI surveillance covered every inch of the mansion. Conrad's network was being mapped. Celine's communications were monitored. The real trap was about to begin. I drove through Boston on autopilot, my mind already preparing for the conversation ahead. The questions Celine would ask, the answers I'd give. Floyd's phone rang as we pulled onto Beacon Hill. He answered, listened. Then his expression changed. Russell, he said. FBI just intercepted a phone call, Celine to Conrad, 15 minutes ago. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. She's moving faster than expected, Floyd said. I'll brief you fully tonight. I pulled into my driveway. The mansion looked exactly as it always did. Beautiful. Historic. Home. But inside, Celine was waiting, and she'd just accelerated her timeline. Everything now depended on whether she believed the lies I was about to tell her. I walked into the house and found Celine in the kitchen exactly where I knew she'd be. Where's Pierce? She asked immediately. His flight should have landed. Delayed. I said, keeping my voice level. Mechanical issue. He texted he'll try to catch a later flight. She frowned. That's the second delay this week. These airlines. I nodded and went upstairs. That night at 11 o'clock, Floyd called with a warning voice. Solene had just changed her plans. FBI intercepted her call through the legal warrant, he said. She just ordered Conrad to activate 2 days earlier than planned. I sat up in bed. When? Tomorrow morning. But there's more. She mentioned Plan B in the call. If the car accident fails, for any reason, she has powerful sleeping pills ready to put in Pierce's drink at home. Sleeping pills. Powerful ones. The kind hospice uses. Fatal dose disguised in coffee or wine. She's been preparing for months. 48 hours, 2 days. That's how long I had to protect my son from a woman who'd been planning his death for months. That's how long before Solene would realize Pierce wasn't coming home and shift to whatever backup plan she had waiting. Floyd, I said, we have to move faster. I know, Whitaker agrees. We activate the counterplan in 48 hours whether we're ready or not. I put the phone down and stared at the ceiling. Down the hall, Solene slept peacefully. Somewhere in the walls, FBI surveillance equipment recorded everything. 48 hours. The next morning at 9:37, my secure phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. 3 lines. I am the nurse who cared for your wife in her final months. I know something about her death. I have been silent for too long. I called the number immediately. A woman answered, voice older, trembling slightly. Mr. Pennington, this is Doris Newberry. Doris Newberry, 58, and a retired hospice nurse, had cared for Eleanor Pennington during her final months and for 3 years had carried the weight of suspicion about that death, too afraid to speak until this morning when guilt finally overcame fear. You said you knew something about my wife's death, I said. Yes. Long pause. I've been carrying this for 3 years. I'm sorry I didn't speak sooner. Tell me. In the last 6 months of Mrs. Pennington's life, she had symptoms that didn't match her blood pressure medication. Unusual heart palpitations, episodes of weakness. I reported it to the doctor but was told it was normal for her age and condition. I gripped the phone tighter. After she passed, Doris continued, I saw your daughter-in-law packing up the medicine box. She moved so quickly, like she wanted it gone before anyone looked closely. It's haunted me for 3 years, Mr. Pennington. Something wasn't right. Eleanor, my wife of 30 years, the woman who'd held my hand through every difficult case, every late night at the courthouse, every moment of doubt. The woman I'd watched die slowly, painfully, while I sat helpless beside her bed. That woman murdered. Why are you calling me now? I asked. Because I saw the news yesterday. About your daughter-in-law. About what she tried to do to your son. And I realized... Her voice broke. I realized if I'd spoken 3 years ago, maybe Pierce wouldn't have been in danger now. Ms. Newberry, will you testify to what you just told me? Yes, if it helps. It will. Stay by this number. The FBI will contact you within the hour. I called Floyd immediately. Within 30 minutes, Agent Whitaker had signed the paperwork requesting a court order to analyze Eleanor's stored medical records and blood samples from the hospital. Within an hour, Doris Newberry was sitting in the FBI office giving her formal statement. I stood at my office window looking out at Beacon Hill. The October morning was gray rain falling steadily on the historic streets. For 3 years, I'd believed I lost Eleanor to fate, to age, to illness, to the cruel randomness of life. I'd sat beside her bed watching her fade. I'd held her hand through the pain. I'd buried her believing it was natural causes. But the woman who just called me was suggesting something I hadn't dared to think about. Something that made every moment of grief I'd carried suddenly transform into something else entirely. If Doris was right, if those symptoms were wrong, if that medicine box was packed too hastily, if Solene had done to Eleanor what she was trying to do to Pierce, then everything changed. My wife hadn't died of natural causes. She'd been murdered by the woman living in my house, the woman I'd welcomed as family, the woman who sat across from me at dinner every evening with that warm smile. And if Solene had killed Eleanor, then Pierce wasn't her first target. He was her second. I thought about the insurance policy. What had Eleanor been worth to Solene, the mansion, the estate, everything I owned? How long had she been planning this? Had she married Pierce already knowing she'd kill Eleanor first, then him? I put my hand on the window glass, feeling the cold seep through. 3 years I'd grieved for Eleanor. 3 years of carrying that loss, believing it was fate. And all that time her killer had been living in my home, sleeping down the hall, eating meals I prepared, accepting my trust. My phone rang. Floyd. Whitaker just got the court order, he said. Hospital is pulling Eleanor's medical records now. Blood samples will be analyzed by FBI forensics. We'll know within 48 hours. 48 hours, the same deadline Solene had given me. Everything was converging on the same 2-day window. Russell, Floyd said quietly, if this is true, if Solene killed Eleanor, you need to be prepared for what that means. I know what it means. Do you? Because it means you've been living with your wife's murderer for 3 years. It means every smile, every conversation, every family dinner, all of it was her laughing at you. I closed my eyes. I know, I said. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally are two different things. And what I was feeling now, standing in my office, rain falling on Boston, my son hiding in an FBI safe house, my daughter-in-law planning his murder in the room downstairs, wasn't grief anymore. It was something colder, something more focused, something that 3 decades on the federal bench had taught me to channel into precise, methodical action. If Solene had killed Eleanor, I would prove it. If she was planning to kill Pierce, I would stop it. And when this was over, she would face justice. That night was the first night in 3 years I stood before the door of the room I had never dared to open again. Eleanor's bedroom, closed since her funeral, untouched, preserved exactly as she'd left it that final morning when she'd gone to the hospital for the last time. I stood in the hallway with my hand on the doorknob. I couldn't turn it. I'd lost my wife 3 years ago. Or so I'd believed. But grief, real grief, is built on the belief that death came naturally, that nothing could have prevented it. What I was feeling now wasn't grief anymore. It was something colder, sharper, and infinitely more dangerous. I remembered those final months with devastating new clarity now. The afternoons Eleanor sat watching television but didn't want to eat. The nights she complained of fatigue in a way that felt different from before. The doctor's worried look I'd thought was just normal concern for an aging patient. All of it now meant something else. She'd been dying, but not from age or illness. From poison. Administered slowly, carefully by someone who'd planned every dose, who'd sat beside her at dinner smiling while Eleanor grew weaker. I withdrew my hand from the doorknob. Couldn't open it. Couldn't enter. Not yet. Not until I'd finished what Eleanor couldn't finish herself. I turned away and picked up my phone. "We activate the plan tomorrow," I said when Floyd answered. "Are you sure?" "Completely." Before going to bed, I looked one last time at that closed bedroom door. "Just wait for me a little longer," I whispered. "Before I tell you what the preliminary forensic results revealed about Eleanor's death, if you're still with me right now, comment your honest gut feeling. A, if you think Solene planned Eleanor's murder before marrying Pierce, or B, if you think Eleanor's death gave her the idea for Pierce's. Add just one short reason why you chose that answer. Please note the next part includes some fictionalized details to convey the emotional weight of this moment, though the message behind it is what matters most. 72 hours after I signed the consent form, my phone rang at 6 a.m. Agent Whitaker's voice was measured professional, but I heard something underneath it. "We have preliminary results," he said. "Stored tissue samples from Eleanor's 3-year-old autopsy reveal unusual concentrations of certain compounds inconsistent with the prescribed blood pressure medication she was taking. I had requested a partial autopsy at the time. Something had felt wrong, though I couldn't name it then. The hospital had retained samples as standard protocol. Now the forensic pharmacology team had found what no one thought to look for 3 years ago." I sat up in bed. "What kind of compounds?" "The kind that would cause cardiac episodes, heart palpitations, weakness, symptoms that mimic natural decline in an elderly patient with pre-existing conditions. Eleanor. The woman I'd loved for 30 years. The woman who died in this house while I sat helpless beside her bed. She hadn't died of illness. She'd been murdered. By the woman who now slept 3 doors down from where I was sitting." "Is this enough?" I asked. "Not yet for formal forensic conclusion," Whitaker said, "but it's enough to open a parallel criminal investigation. Court order approved, hospital cooperating. Official results will come through court proceedings. But Russell, this is preliminary confirmation of what you suspected." I hung up. Floyd appeared in my doorway 5 minutes later. He'd been in the FBI surveillance van outside all night. He must have heard the call. We sat in my office. 5 minutes of complete silence. Neither of us spoke. Outside, Boston was waking up. October 16th, Wednesday morning. Normal people going to normal jobs, living normal lives. Inside this mansion, I was sitting with the knowledge that my wife had been murdered 3 years ago by my daughter-in-law. Finally, Floyd spoke. "Do you want to stop?" I looked at my friend of 40 years. The question wasn't about whether we should continue. It was about whether I could handle what came next. Whether discovering Eleanor's murder would break me before we could finish the trap we'd set for Solene. But what Floyd didn't understand was that this wasn't breaking me. It was clarifying everything. I stood up. "No," I said. "We have 2 days left before Solene realizes Pierce isn't coming home. Let's begin." Floyd nodded slowly. "What changed?" he asked. "Everything," I said. "I'm not just protecting my son anymore. I'm fighting for justice for both of them." We spent the next hour planning the final details with Whitaker on secure video. The simulated Tesla crash, the I-93 route timing, Massachusetts State Police coordination, The moment Pierce would walk through that secret office door alive while Solene watched in horror. Every piece was in position. Every player knew their role. In 48 hours, Solene would learn that her carefully constructed plan had failed. And more importantly, she would learn that I'd known everything, that I'd been watching her, that I'd been building a trap around her while she thought she was the predator, that her first victim, my wife, had not died in vain. I looked at the calendar on my office wall, October 16th. Pierce's fake death was scheduled for October 17th, tomorrow. Solene's arrest would follow within hours. And after that, the investigation into Eleanor's death would proceed through official channels with all the evidence Floyd and the FBI had gathered over the past 2 weeks. Justice for Eleanor. Safety for Pierce. Truth for everyone. That's what the next 48 hours would bring. I just had to hold myself together long enough to see it through. That afternoon, I sat in an FBI safe house looking at architectural drawings of a car crash. Not accident reconstruction diagrams, blueprints for engineering a fake death. The FBI doesn't just investigate murders. Sometimes with a federal judge's authorization, they stage them too. Floyd stood beside me, pointing at the technical schematics spread across the conference table. Pierce sat across from us, pale but focused. Tesla Model S, Floyd said. Route 2 near Lexington. 7 a.m. tomorrow morning. We'll simulate brake failure using the same remote override Conrad installed. Controlled collision into the guardrail designed to look fatal but using crash test engineering principles. Agent Whitaker pulled up a video on the laptop crash test footage from a facility I didn't recognize. We've run this scenario 4 times, he said. Airbag deployment time to maximum protective effect. Breakaway props in the guardrail to absorb impact. Pierce will have bruising minor cuts for authenticity but nothing serious. I watched Pierce watching the crash footage, my son, preparing to fake his own death. Dale Okafor, the FBI technical specialist, explained the details. I noticed his hands as he gestured, scarred what looked like old electrical burns across his palms and fingers. I found myself wondering what FBI technical specialists did to learn their craft, what rooms they worked in, what mistakes left those kinds of scars. The remote override will mimic Conrad's hack signature exactly, Dale said. When Solene checks, and she will check, she'll see her plan executed perfectly. Brake system failure at precisely the right moment on the Route 2 curve. Conrad's location, I asked. Identified through financial tracking, Floyd said. Cambridge apartment. We'll arrest him simultaneously with Solene. Neither one gets a chance to warn the other or destroy evidence. Pierce looked up. What do I do? Play dead, Whitaker said bluntly. Emergency services will be our people. They'll load you into the ambulance, transport you to the hospital, officially pronounce you dead within 2 hours. By then, we'll have Solene in custody. And if something goes wrong, Pierce asked, then you really die, I said quietly. Everyone looked at me. He needs to hear it, I said. This isn't a video game. If the engineering fails, if the timing is off by 2 seconds, if something goes wrong with those crash test protocols, he dies, really dies, and I'll have killed him trying to save him. Pierce met my eyes. I trust you, Dad. We took a break. 20 minutes to process, to breathe, to pretend this was all somehow normal. Pierce pulled me aside into an empty room. Dad, he said, there's something I never told you about Solene. His voice was shaking. 3 years ago, he continued, 2021, I was 32. Solene asked me to sign some life insurance papers. Said it was standard married couple financial planning. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. She wanted me to get $10 million coverage. I was 32 years old, Dad, healthy, no dependents. I told her it seemed excessive. What did she say? She got furious, like really angry, accused me of not trusting her, of not planning for our future together. I'd never seen her like that before. Through the safe house window, I could see October afternoon light streaming through the leaves. Golden hour, beautiful. The kind of afternoon that makes Boston feel magical. Outside, people were walking dogs, pushing strollers, living ordinary lives. Inside, my son was telling me his wife had been planning his murder for 3 years. I refused to sign, Pierce said. Told her if she wanted life insurance, we'd get something reasonable, maybe $1 million, enough to cover mortgage and expenses if something happened. She backed down, apologized, said she was just being overly cautious. Pierce, I said, that insurance policy the FBI found, the one with your signature, it's dated 6 months ago. He looked at me. She forged it, I said. She forged your signature. I watched my son's face as he processed this. The woman he'd married, the woman he'd trusted, the woman who'd been planning to kill him since he was 23 years old. Dad, he said, voice breaking, she's been planning this since before Mom died. I know. She killed Mom first, then was going to kill me. She's been... He couldn't finish. I called Floyd into the room, told him what Pierce had just revealed. We'll subpoena the insurance documents, Floyd said immediately. Handwriting analysis will prove forgery. That's another charge: insurance fraud, identity theft, forgery, plus 3 more years of premeditation. Pierce was shaking now. She's been planning to kill me since I was 23. That's when he broke. My son, chief security architect, the man who trusted me enough to fake his own death, broke down in that FBI safe house and couldn't stop shaking. I held him. The way I'd held him when he was 5 and fell off his bike. The way I'd held him when he was 12 and his first girlfriend broke his heart. The way I'd held him at Eleanor's funeral. But this was different. This was holding a grown man who'd just learned his wife had spent 3 years planning his murder. Who'd spent those 3 years sleeping beside her, eating meals with her, building a life with her. Never knowing. FBI agents appeared in the doorway. Time to go. Pierce had to be moved to the final staging area. Floyd looked at me. Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m., Route 2 near Lexington. If Celine takes the bait, we'll have her by noon. I watched Pierce walk out to the black FBI SUV. Watched him get in. Watched the vehicle pull away. Tomorrow morning, my son would die in that Tesla. And if anything went wrong, if the engineering failed, if the timing was off, if Celine had planned something the FBI hadn't anticipated, it wouldn't be fake. I stood in the parking lot long after the SUV disappeared. 48 hours ago, I'd been a retired judge living quietly in Beacon Hill. Now I was orchestrating my son's fake death to trap a woman who'd murdered my wife and planned to murder him. Tomorrow would determine everything. I got in my car and drove toward home. Toward Celine, toward the hardest performance of my life. One more night of lies. One more dinner across from a killer. One more evening pretending I knew nothing. Tomorrow at 7 a.m., everything would change. I drove home through evening Boston traffic, rehearsing the lies I'd tell. That night I slept or pretended to in the room down the hall from Celine. The FBI surveillance equipment hummed in the walls. Floyd was watching. Whitaker was watching. Tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., my son would fake his death. I ate breakfast with my daughter-in-law, knowing it would be the last morning she believed my son was alive. Still no word from Pierce, Celine asked, pouring coffee. Flight delays, I said. Should be home this morning. She smiled, warm, genuine, the smile of someone who cared, or the smile of someone counting down hours. At 9:47 a.m., Pierce walked through the front door. Celine rushed to him, threw her arms around him, kissed him, not a quick peck, but a long, tender kiss, a real kiss, the kind that spoke of genuine affection, genuine longing. I stood in the hallway watching. Pierce looked at me over her shoulder. Our eyes met for half a second. Then he turned back to her. I missed you, he said. I was counting every hour, she replied. That's what made it terrifying. Not that she was cold, not that she was obviously evil, but that she could feel this real affection, real tenderness, and still plan his murder. People aren't simple. Killers aren't monsters. They're human beings capable of love and murder in the same breath. I have a client meeting this afternoon, Pierce said, pulling away. 3-hour drive. I'll leave around 2. Today, Celine frowned. You just got home. Can't be helped. Big client, but I'll be back for dinner. Drive safely, baby, please. I noticed my hands shaking as I held my coffee mug. Noticed and couldn't stop them. I was terrified. Not of Celine, of the plan, of the engineering failing, of the timing being off, of my son really dying in that Tesla because I'd orchestrated it. Pierce went upstairs to change. Celine stood at the window, watching him leave, an hour later waving as he pulled out of the driveway. In that Tesla, with the FBI's fake version of Conrad's device installed, heading toward Route 2 near Lexington. I looked at the clock. 2:07 p.m. The crash was scheduled for 3:17. 70 minutes. I sat in the living room with Celine. She turned on the TV. Some afternoon talk show. We didn't speak much. Just 2 people in a house waiting. I wondered if she was counting down too. At 3:17 exactly, my phone buzzed. Text from Floyd, done. I stared at the screen, one word, done. My son had just faked his death, or died. I wouldn't know which for another 20 minutes. Celine didn't notice. She was watching TV, laughing at something the host said. At 3:38, the news alert flashed across the screen. Breaking news, fatal accident on Route 2 near Lexington. Celine straightened. The TV cut to a reporter standing on a highway. Behind her, smoke. Emergency vehicles. That section of guardrail the FBI had spent 3 days engineering to look catastrophic but protect Pierce. A Tesla Model S plunged through the guardrail here on Route 2 approximately 20 minutes ago. The vehicle burst into flames. Police have confirmed no survivors. The driver has been identified as Pierce Pennington, age 35, of Boston. The TV anchor said, no survivors. And I felt the words hit me like a physical blow, even though I knew it wasn't real. My body believed it. My body heard those words and felt Pierce dying and couldn't process that it was staged. Celine stood up, hand over her mouth. The phone rang. I answered. A voice I didn't recognize, FBI agent playing state police. Is this Judge Russell Pennington? Yes. Sir, I'm calling about your son. There's been an accident. I looked at Celine. She was staring at me, waiting. What kind of accident? Fatal, sir. Vehicle accident on Route 2. I'm very sorry. I lowered the phone slowly. Celine's face, I watched it carefully. Had been watching it since the TV alert. Before the tears fell, before the sob, before anything else, 1 second, just one. Her face softened, not with grief, with relief. I saw it. Pure, undisguised relief. The mask slipped for 1 second and I saw what was underneath. Then it was gone, replaced by shock horror tears. She crumpled, fell to her knees sobbing. No, not Pierce, not my baby. But I'd seen it, that 1 second of relief before the performance began. I turned away, had to, because if I kept looking at her I wouldn't be able to control what came next. 35 years as a federal judge, 35 years of controlling every reaction, every emotion, every facial expression while hearing testimony that made me want to rage or weep. All of that training went into walking away from Celine, into standing at the window with my back to her, into breathing normally while she sobbed on the floor behind me. The phone rang again. Different number. Floyd. Russell. Yes. Now. One word, that's all he needed. Celine was still sobbing in the living room. Genuine sounds, genuine tears, a performance perfected over years of planning. Those who cry from pain tremble. I'd learned that in my courtroom. Real grief shakes the whole body, breaks the voice, destroys composure. Those who cry for show only have tears. Celine's tears were perfect, but her hands were steady. I understood then what I was watching. Not grief, not even relief anymore. Victory. She thought she'd won. Floyd called at 8 p.m. to tell me my wife had already started spending our dead son's money. 3 calls in the last 2 hours, he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. First call at 6:14, her estate attorney. Second at 6:49, the life insurance company. Third at 7:32, a commercial real estate broker specializing in luxury property liquidation. I sat in my study with the door closed, the room dark except for the lamp on my desk. Through the window I could see the Charles River black and still. Pierce had been dead for 4 hours. She's not wasting time, I said. There's more. Floyd's keyboard clicked in the background. Our tech team flagged search activity on her laptop. She's been researching flights to Geneva, one-way tickets, business class, departure date November 1st, 2 weeks from now. 2 weeks. Just long enough to settle the estate, collect the insurance, liquidate the mansion. Then disappear to a country with strict banking privacy laws and no extradition treaty for financial crimes. She thinks she's won, Floyd said. She thinks Pierce is dead, I corrected. She thinks she's a widow collecting what's rightfully hers. She has no idea we know about Eleanor, no idea we've been watching her for 3 months, no idea her husband is alive in a safe house eating takeout and watching baseball. Judge, I've arrested 200 people in my career. I've never seen someone move this fast. Most murderers wait at least a day before they start spending the blood money. I heard crying from down the hall. Celine's voice breaking and desperate. Performing grief for the housekeeper, probably. Or maybe calling her mother in France to share the tragic news. She's not most murderers, I said. She's been planning this for 18 months. She knows exactly what she's doing. Floyd was quiet for a moment. The realtor she called specializes in quick luxury sales. His average time to close is 43 days. She told him she needs it done in 30. Yashishiro. 30 days. Collect $10 million in insurance. Sell a $20 million mansion. Transfer everything offshore. Vanish. I thought about Eleanor's funeral 3 years ago. Celine standing beside me in a black dress, holding my hand, crying into my shoulder. I'd thought she was devastated. I'd thought she loved my wife like a mother. She'd been crying while planning her escape route even then. Floyd, I said, what time is Conrad supposed to arrive at the field office? Midnight. We're bringing him in for routine questioning about his business relationship with Pierce. He doesn't know we know about the Tesla hack. He thinks we're just doing due diligence. Call me when he's there. Will do. I hung up and sat in the darkness listening to Celine cry in the next room while she booked flights to Switzerland. Floyd called again at 11:53 p.m. You need to hear this, he said. His voice sounded different, shaken. Conrad Travers just walked into the Boston field office. He didn't wait for us to bring him in. He came on his own. What? He arrived at 11:47 p.m., walked up to the security desk and said, I'm quoting here, I need to confess to murder. I killed Pierce Pennington today at 3:17 p.m. I'm here to surrender. Beachy. My hand tightened on the phone. He thinks Pierce is actually dead. He brought everything, Judge. His laptop with the Tesla hack software, his phone with 18 months of encrypted messages to Celine, bank records showing the $100,000 Bitcoin payment, a handwritten timeline documenting every step of the plan from initial contact to today's execution. He's giving us everything. Why? He says he can't live with it. Says he thought he could go through with it for the money, but the moment he triggered the acceleration override and watched the Tesla go off the road, he knew he couldn't run. He's been sitting in his apartment for 8 hours trying to decide whether to kill himself or turn himself in. I heard voices in the background, FBI agents probably processing Conrad's confession. He chose confession, Floyd continued. He's in interview room 3 right now. His hands are shaking so badly we had to type his statement for him. He just sits there and talks, and our agent types. He's telling us everything, every conversation with Soline, every planning session, every test run on the Tesla's remote access protocols. Does he know Pierce survived? No. He has no idea the airbag deployed or that we pulled your son out 30 seconds after the crash. He thinks he's confessing to murder. He keeps saying, "I killed him," over and over. Is he asking for a lawyer? No, he waived his rights. He wants to confess. It's like he needs to say it all out loud or he'll explode. I thought about Conrad Travers, 34 years old, MIT graduate cybersecurity consultant, smart enough to hack a Tesla, not strong enough to live with murder. What about Soline? I asked. That's why I'm calling. Floyd's voice hardened. Conrad gave us every message she sent him, every instruction, every threat when he tried to back out. We have her on conspiracy to commit murder, solicitation of murder, wire fraud, insurance fraud, and about 6 other charges. The evidence is ironclad, her own words and her own messages. When do you arrest her? Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. I'm getting the warrant signed right now. We'll have a team at the mansion at 8 sharp. I looked at the clock. It was 12:07 a.m. October 18th. In 7 hours and 53 minutes, FBI agents would knock on my door and arrest my daughter-in-law for the murder of my wife and the attempted murder of my son. Judge, Floyd said quietly, it's over. Conrad just handed us everything we needed. She has no cards left to play. I hung up and walked to the window. Across the hall, Soline's light was still on. She was probably still on the phone with the realtor negotiating her quick sale. She had no idea the accomplice she'd trusted with murder had just destroyed her entire escape plan. She had no idea the federal government now possessed 18 months of communications documenting every detail of her crimes. She had no idea that in less than 8 hours, everything would end. I scheduled the meeting for 10 a.m. because I wanted her to see sunlight one last time as a free woman. The FBI had been ready at 8. Floyd called me at 7:59 to confirm the team was in position. I told him to wait. I told him I needed 2 more hours. He didn't understand at first, said every minute we delayed gave Soline time to run, to destroy evidence, to disappear. I reminded him she thought she'd already won. She wasn't running. She was harvesting. And I wanted to look her in the eyes when she realized the truth. She arrived at 9:58 wearing the black Chanel suit she'd worn to Eleanor's funeral, her hair pulled back in a perfect chignon, diamond earrings catching the morning light through my office windows. She brought her attorney, Marcus Ashford, 46 years old partner at Ashford & Klein Platinum Rolex on his wrist, and a briefcase that probably cost more than most people's cars. He specialized in high net worth estate law, the kind of lawyer you hired when you needed to move $20 million quickly and quietly. Russell, Soline said, her voice soft with manufactured grief. We need to discuss Pierce's life insurance. Marcus is here to help us navigate. I pressed the button under my desk. The office door lock clicked. Soline stopped mid-sentence. Marcus glanced at the door, then back at me, his expression shifting from professional courtesy to uncertainty. Sit down, I said. Soline's eyes narrowed, but she sat. Marcus remained standing for a moment, then lowered himself into the chair beside her briefcase, balanced on his knees like a shield. I picked up the remote control from my desk and aimed it at the large monitor mounted on the wall behind them. They turned in their seats to look. The first image filled the screen, Soline and Conrad Travers sitting in a Brookline coffee shop, heads bent close together. August 3rd, 2023. 17 months ago. The timestamp glowed in the corner. High-resolution surveillance photograph, every detail crystal clear. What is this? Soline's voice was still calm, but I heard the edge beneath it. I clicked to the next image. Insurance documents spread across my desk. Eleanor's life insurance policy. The beneficiary change form with my forged signature. Date October 27th, 2021. 3 weeks before my wife died. Click. Tesla Model S technical schematic with handwritten notes in Conrad's writing. Brake override protocols. Remote acceleration access. Emergency system disable sequences. Click. Bitcoin wallet transfer history. $100,000 moving from an account registered to Esmero Soline's maiden name to Conrad Travers. Date September 9th, 2024, 5 weeks ago. I caught the scent of her perfume as she shifted in her chair, Chanel number 5. The same fragrance she'd worn the day we buried Eleanor. The same scent that had clung to my suit jacket when she embraced me at the funeral, sobbing into my shoulder while I patted her back and told her everything would be all right. She'd planned even that detail. Chosen the perfume deliberately. Created a complete performance down to the smallest sensory element. She'd been method acting grief for 3 years. Click. Encrypted message logs, 18 months of communications between Soline and Conrad. I let them scroll slowly across the screen. Her instructions, his questions, her threats when he tried to back out, his final acceptance when she doubled the payment. Marcus Ashford sat frozen briefcase clutched against his chest, staring at the screen like a man watching his career implode in real time. Click. Video footage from October 17th. Yesterday, 2:47 p.m. Soline's Mercedes pulling into a parking lot 3 miles from the crash site, her waiting in the car, her checking her phone at 3:18 p.m. 1 minute after Pierce's Tesla went off the road, her satisfied smile, her driving away. Click. Final image. Conrad Travers in FBI interview room 3, hands shaking, face pale, speaking into a camera while an agent typed his confession. I turned off the monitor and swiveled my chair to face them. Soline stared at me for a long moment. Then she laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh or a defensive laugh. It was genuine, real amusement bubbling up from somewhere deep inside her. She actually thought this was funny. Her head tilted back slightly, her mouth curving into a smile that reached her eyes. She looked at me the way you'd look at a child who tried to build a trap out of cardboard boxes and string. She truly believed she was untouchable. "Russell," she said, still smiling, "I don't know where you got all this, but none of it is admissible. You obtained it without a warrant. You had someone follow me, hack my communications, surveil my private conversations. No judge will accept." She stopped. Her smile faltered. She remembered what I'd been for 30 years before I retired. I was the judge. "You're right," I said. "I didn't get a warrant." Marcus Ashford found his voice. "Then this meeting is over. We're leaving." He stood gripping his briefcase. "And I'm advising my client not to speak another word." Soline stood as well, smoothing her suit jacket. Her confidence returned. She thought she'd won on a technicality. Thought I'd shown my hand too early and given her the ammunition she needed to walk away clean. "This is harassment," she said, turning toward the door. "We're leaving." I stood and walked past them, moving toward the side wall of my office where built-in bookshelves stretched from floor to ceiling. Soline watched me confused. Marcus checked his watch, impatient. I reached for what looked like a decorative wooden panel between 2 shelves. My fingers found the hidden latch. Soline's smile faltered. She'd been in this office 100 times over the past 8 years. She'd never known this door existed. I pulled the panel open. Floyd Rawlings stepped through warrant folder in his raised hand. 3 FBI agents in tactical gear followed him into the room, hands resting on their holstered weapons. "Soline Pennington," Floyd said, his voice formal and final. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, and insurance fraud." The door opened and my dead son walked into the room. Pierce stepped through, first alive and whole, wearing the same jeans and MIT sweatshirt he'd had on when I'd driven him to the FBI safe house 12 days ago. His face was tired but calm. He looked directly at Soline. She screamed. The sound tore out of her throat, raw and animal. Nothing practiced or performed about it. She stumbled backward, her heel catching on the chair-leg arms, windmilling for balance. Marcus Ashford caught her elbow, steadying her, his own face frozen in shock. "No," Soline whispered. Then louder, "No, no, you're dead. The news, the car." Pierce took 3 steps into the office. He didn't smile, didn't speak at first, just looked at her with eyes that had lost something fundamental in the past 12 days, some basic trust in the world that could never be restored. "Careful," he said finally. His voice was flat. "You told me to drive carefully that morning. Remember? You kissed me at the door and said, 'Drive carefully.' Were you careful when you tried to kill me?" Soline shook her head, backing against the wall, her perfect composure shattered into jagged pieces. "This is insane. I don't understand, Russell. What is this?" Floyd Rawlings stepped through the door behind Pierce, followed by 3 FBI agents in tactical vests. One of them carried a leather portfolio, another held an evidence box. "Soline Pennington," Floyd said, moving to stand beside my desk. "I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, wire fraud, insurance fraud, and obstruction of justice." He placed the warrant on my desk. The paper made a soft sound against the wood. Soline's eyes darted from Pierce to me to Floyd to the agents blocking the door. I watched her face cycle through expressions in the span of 3 seconds, shock melting into denial, denial hardening into calculation, calculation crumbling into fear. I could see her mind racing, searching for the escape route, the explanation, the performance that would save her. But there was nothing. Every exit had been closed before she'd walked into this room. "I want my attorney," she said, her voice steadying slightly. She turned to Marcus. "Marcus, tell them." "I'm your state attorney," Marcus said quietly, still gripping his briefcase like a life preserver. "You need a criminal defense lawyer. I can't help you with this." One of the FBI agents opened the office door. 2 more agents entered, escorting a figure in handcuffs. Conrad Travers walked in with his head down, wrists bound in front of him, an agent gripping each arm. His face was gray. He didn't look at Solene, didn't look at anyone, just stared at the floor as they positioned him near the wall. "Tell them," Solene said, her voice rising. "Conrad, tell them this is wrong." Conrad didn't lift his head, didn't speak. The silence stretched out like a wire pulled too tight. Floyd picked up the evidence box and placed it on my desk. He opened it methodically, removing items one by one. "Search warrant executed at 6 a.m. this morning at the residence of Conrad Travers." He placed the document on the desk. "USB drive containing Mr. Travers' full confession recorded at 11:53 p.m. October 17th. Server logs from his encrypted communications with you over the past 18 months. Bitcoin wallet transaction history." He pulled out another folder. "Preliminary forensic analysis completed by our medical examiner, Dr. Alan Forsyth." Dr. Alan Forsyth stepped into the doorway. I'd met him twice during the investigation, 58 years old. Former chief medical examiner for Suffolk County, wire-rimmed glasses, and the careful diction of someone who'd testified in court 1,000 times. "Preliminary forensics confirm long-term pharmaceutical substitution in victim Eleanor Pennington's medication regimen," Dr. Forsyth said. "Blood samples retained from her final hospitalization show therapeutic levels of ephedrine and pseudoephedrine consistent with deliberate cardiac stimulation. Pharmacy records indicate her prescribed beta blockers were never dispensed after March 2021, though prescription refills were regularly claimed." Solene went very still. The calculation drained from her face, replaced by something colder. She looked at Pierce, then at me, then at the evidence spread across my desk. 6 months, she said quietly. "I replaced Eleanor's pills for 6 months, swapped her blood pressure medication for high-dose ephedrine from the pharmacy stockpile at the hospital where I volunteered. Her heart couldn't take it. Every chest pain, every episode I did that." The words hit me like a physical blow. 6 months. Eleanor had suffered for 6 months, her heart deteriorating, her confusion growing as the wrong medication flooded her system. Every hospital visit, every midnight ambulance call, every time she'd clutched my hand and whispered that something felt wrong, deliberately inflicted. Floyd pulled out a card and began reading. "Solene Pennington, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney." "Why?" Pierce's voice cut through the formal recitation. "Why did you kill my mother?" Solene met his eyes. "The money was always going to be yours eventually. I just moved up the timeline." "I know," I said. Everyone turned to look at me. Solene's eyes widened. "I've known for 3 weeks," I continued, my voice level and judicial. "Since September 27th, FBI medical examiner analyzed Eleanor's retained blood samples. Pharmacy records showed the prescription discrepancy. Eleanor's private nurse testified that you always administered her evening medications personally. Forensic pharmacology confirmed the substitution pattern." Solene stared at me. You knew, and you—" "I waited," I said. "I waited for you to confess. I wanted you to say it while looking at Pierce, while looking at the son whose life you tried to take after you murdered his mother." I gestured to the corner of my office where a small camera light blinked red. "The FBI has been recording since you walked in." Floyd nodded to his agents. They moved forward, pulling Solene's arms behind her back. The handcuffs clicked shut, 2 sharp metallic sounds that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. They led her toward the door. She didn't resist, didn't speak, just walked between the agents like someone moving through a dream. The door closed behind them. Footsteps receded down the hall. Car doors slammed outside. An engine started. Pierce and I stood alone in my office for the first time in 12 days. "You knew about Mom." His voice broke on the last word. I nodded. He crossed the room and wrapped his arms around me. We stood there, both of us shaking, while through the window I watched the FBI SUV drive away with Solene inside. I spent 30 years sitting behind the bench. Now I sat in the witness chair and the view was terrifying. 2 weeks had passed since FBI agents led Solene out of my office in handcuffs. 2 weeks of statements and depositions and evidence reviews. Pierce had moved back into the mansion, his old bedroom on the third floor, not the suite he'd shared with Celine. We barely spoke about what had happened. What could we say that hadn't already been said in that office with cameras recording? Now I sat in the Boston Federal Court grand jury room facing 23 citizens who held my wife's justice in their hands. The assistant U.S. attorney, a sharp woman in her 40s named Catherine Boyle, stood beside a projection screen displaying Conrad's laptop files. She'd been methodical for the past 3 hours, walking the jury through every piece of evidence. Encrypted messages, Bitcoin transactions, Tesla remote access logs, Eleanor's pharmacy records showing the prescription discrepancy, the forensic analysis of her blood samples. "Judge Pennington," Catherine said, turning to face me, "in your professional opinion, was the defendant, Celine Pennington, aware she was being recorded during her confession on October 18th? "Yes," I said. "I informed her directly. I gestured to the camera and stated that the FBI had been recording since she entered the office. And her response? She said nothing. The agents arrested her immediately after." Catherine nodded and returned to her evidence. I sat in the wooden chair, the same style of chair I'd looked down at from the bench 10,000 times, and felt the weight of being on this side of the process. Every eye in the room on me, every word analyzed, every gesture interpreted. I'd spent 3 decades wielding the gavel. Now I was just another witness hoping the system would work. The grand jury foreman, a man in his 60s with silver hair and bifocals, raised his hand when Catherine finished. The jury filed out to deliberate. I sat in the witness waiting room with Pierce, neither of us speaking until they called us back 47 minutes later. The foreman signed the indictment with a pen that made a scratching sound against the paper. 2 counts of first-degree murder, Eleanor Pennington deceased and Pierce Pennington attempted. Conspiracy charges, fraud charges, the list went on. I watched him sign and realized this was the first time in 30 years I'd seen this moment from outside the bench. I'd watched court clerks process thousands of indictments, routine paperwork, administrative necessity, the machinery of justice turning another increment forward. From the witness side, it looked different. Each signature felt momentous. Each stamp of the official seal felt like a door closing. Humbling, strange, necessary. The bail hearing came next, same day, different courtroom. Judge Margaret Thornton presiding, 62 years old, former prosecutor, reputation for being thorough and unsentimental. I'd worked with her for 15 years before my retirement. She knew me. She also knew what the law required, and friendship would not move her an inch from it. Celine entered in orange prison scrubs, hands cuffed, 2 marshals flanking her. She'd lost weight in 2 weeks. Her hair hung limp, no makeup, no performance. She looked at me once as they led her to the defense table, her eyes empty of everything except exhaustion. Her new attorney, public defender named James Rothman, 38, competent but overworked, stood and argued for house arrest with electronic monitoring. No prior criminal record, ties to the community, presumption of innocence. Catherine Boyle rose to respond. She placed a printed airline itinerary on the evidence table. "Your Honor, on October 17th, the evening of her husband's staged death, the defendant searched for and bookmarked one-way flights to Geneva, Switzerland, departing November 1st, business class. She also contacted a luxury real estate broker about expedited sale of the family mansion. These are not the actions of someone planning to remain in the jurisdiction. The defendant is a French citizen with family in Paris and access to significant offshore financial resources. She represents a substantial flight risk." Judge Thornton studied the itinerary. "Does the defense dispute these facts?" Rothman hesitated. "The searches were preliminary. My client never purchased—" "Because she was arrested first," Catherine interrupted. "The evidence shows clear intent to flee." I sat in the gallery beside Pierce, listening to them argue over Celine's freedom. The courtroom had a particular acoustic. 30 years of hearings had taught me exactly how voices carried in this space. But I'd always heard them from the bench, where the sound rose up and surrounded you, made you part of the architecture. From the gallery, the voices felt distant, separate, like watching theater through glass. Judge Thornton picked up her gavel. The wooden handle looked worn, same gavel I'd seen her use for a decade. She'd told me once that she'd inherited it from her mentor and she'd pass it to someone she trusted when she retired. "Bail is denied," she said. "Defendant represents substantial flight risk as evidenced by purchased international flight search history and clear intent to liquidate assets. Defendant will remain in federal custody pending trial." The gavel struck the bench, one sharp crack that echoed through the courtroom. I'd made that sound 10,000 times. Quick, efficient strike that meant the decision was final, the law had spoken, the next case could proceed. Administrative. Routine. the punctuation mark at the end of a legal sentence. From the gallery, it sounded different. It sounded like a door slamming shut, like a weight settling, like the universe acknowledging that something irreversible had just occurred. It sounded final in a way I'd never understood as a judge. Marshals led Soline out through the side door. She didn't look back. Pierce exhaled beside me, long and shaky, like he'd been holding his breath since we entered the courtroom. Outside the courthouse, Pierce turned to me. How did it feel testifying instead of judging? Terrifying, I admitted, but necessary. Agent Mercer Whitaker approached from across the plaza, his briefcase in one hand and his phone in the other. He'd been consulting with the prosecution team all morning. "Russell," he said, "prosecution is requesting an expedited trial date. They want this resolved before the end of the year. Catherine thinks they can be ready by mid-December. 6 weeks away. Fast for a murder trial." But the evidence was overwhelming, and Conrad's cooperation had eliminated most of the investigation work. "What does that mean for us?" Pierce asked. Whitaker looked at me. "One more testimony, the trial itself. You'll be the prosecution's key witness for both counts." I nodded slowly. The grand jury had been preparation. The real test was still coming. The morning after the indictment, my face was on the front page of every Boston newspaper, not as judge, but as widower. The trial date was set, December 16th. 3 weeks to prepare. 3 weeks before I would stand in a courtroom and describe in clinical detail how my daughter-in-law murdered my wife and tried to murder my son. But first, the world had to know. The Boston Globe ran the story above the fold, "Federal judge's wife charged in double murder plot." The Herald went with "Socialite attorney accused of killing mother-in-law husband." The online outlets picked it up within hours. By evening, national news had descended on Beacon Hill. Pierce sat beside me in the mansion living room the next morning, both of us holding coffee mugs and staring at newspapers spread across the table. His photograph appeared in 3 of them, the official headshot from his cybersecurity firm's website, looking younger and less haunted than he did now. "Federal judge's wife," Pierce read from the Globe headline. "They used your title, not hers. She stopped being an attorney the moment they charged her," I said. He picked up another paper. This one had included a sidebar about Pierce's firm CyberShield Solutions, 32 employees, contracts with Fortune 500 companies. Speculation about whether clients would flee. Questions about Pierce's judgment in marrying a murderer. "Do you want me to issue a statement about your firm?" I asked. "No, the board already handled it." Pierce set down the paper. "They released something yesterday afternoon. Confirmed my status as victim, emphasized my cooperation with law enforcement, assured clients that security protocols were never compromised. Stock dipped 2%, then recovered by close." I watched him speak with the flat effect of someone who'd stopped feeling surprise. The living room felt different without Soline in it. Lighter, somehow. Less like a museum curated for her aesthetic preferences, and more like a home where 2 men were figuring out how to be family again. The windows let in more light than I remembered, or maybe I was just noticing it for the first time in 3 years. Pierce's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then set it face down on the table. "Soline's firm just issued a statement. They've terminated her employment and petitioned the Massachusetts Bar for emergency license revocation." "Fast," I said. "They're covering their liability. Can't have a murder suspect on the letterhead." He stood and walked to the window looking out at the Charles River. The firm she spent 8 years building her reputation at just erased her in 48 hours. I turned on the television. CNN had picked up the story. A legal analyst was discussing the case, the evidence, the charges, the likely outcome. They showed footage of Soline being led into federal court, orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, marshals on either side. Then they showed Eleanor's photograph, the one from her 60th birthday party, smiling in front of the cake Pierce and I had surprised her with. She looked so alive in that picture, so present. "I keep waiting to feel vindicated," Pierce said quietly, still facing the window. "Instead, I just feel tired." I picked up the remote and turned off the television. The sudden silence felt like a physical presence in the room. But it wasn't the heavy silence of secrets and surveillance. It was just quiet. The kind of quiet where 2 people could exist together without words. Pierce turned around. We looked at each other. He nodded slightly. I nodded back. No more needed to be said. "Acta." 3 weeks later, I sat across from Vaughn Castillo in his law office. Pierce sat beside me. The fake, the one we'd created to trap Soline, lay on Vaughn's desk marked "Evidence, FBI Case 2024-CR-00847. Beside it sat a new document, real this time, legally binding. 80% of estate assets to the Boston Justice Foundation. Vaughn read, his reading glasses perched on his nose. Purpose support for domestic crime victims and their families. Eleanor Pennington named as honorary founder. Are you certain? Completely, I said. Vaughn looked at Pierce. This represents approximately $16 million after estate taxes and settlements. You're retaining roughly $4 million. Your children would inherit significantly less than... It's what Mom would have wanted, Pierce interrupted. Actually wanted not what Celine forged. Vaughn slid the document across his desk. Then it's ready for signatures. I picked up the pen, the same Mont Blanc I'd used to sign thousands of legal documents over 3 decades. The weight of it in my hand felt familiar, steady. I read through the dedication section one more time. In memory of Eleanor Pennington, whose life was taken by domestic violence, and whose legacy will now help others survive what she could not. When I wrote her name, Eleanor Margaret Pennington, honorary founder, my hand didn't shake. The letters came out clean and straight. I realized I was finally separating Eleanor's memory from the horror of her death. She could be both the woman I loved and the victim of murder. But the love didn't have to live in the same space as the horror anymore. Pierce signed next. His signature had changed since the last time I'd seen it on legal documents, more controlled, now less fluid. The optimism pressed out by 18 months of living with someone who was planning his death. Vaughn witnessed both signatures, then closed the file folder. She will be pleased, he said softly. Present tense, as if Eleanor could still see what we were doing. Maybe she could. Maybe that's what memorial meant, making the dead present through the choices of the living. The fake will becomes real, I said. Eleanor gets her foundation after all. Vaughn stood and shook our hands. The paperwork will be filed by end of week. The foundation will be operational by January. Pierce and I walked out to the car together. The December air was cold and sharp, carrying the smell of snow that hadn't fallen yet. We drove in silence, comfortable silence, not the weighted kind, watching Boston slide past the windows. I thought Eleanor would be proud. Pierce spoke at the same moment. Mom would have loved this. We looked at each other. He smiled slightly. I smiled back. For the first time since Eleanor's death, we'd shared a thought of her that didn't come wrapped in pain. The trial was 3 weeks away. December brought the first snow, and I finally opened the door I'd locked 3 years ago. 3 weeks had passed since Pierce and I signed the foundation papers. 3 weeks of quiet mornings and careful conversations. 3 weeks of building something that resembled a relationship between a father and son who'd survived the same war. The trial started in 7 days. I stood in the 3rd floor hallway, watching snow fall past the window, coating Beacon Hill in white silence. The bedroom door was 5 feet to my left, Eleanor's door. I'd walked past it every day for 3 years without looking directly at it. Had learned to navigate the hallway with my eyes fixed forward, peripheral vision blurred, muscle memory carrying me safely past. This morning I turned and faced it. The brass handle was tarnished. 3 years without being touched will do that. Dust had settled in the carved details of the wooden frame. A small crack ran through the paint near the bottom hinge where Eleanor had accidentally kicked it once while carrying laundry, laughing at her own clumsiness. 3 years is long enough, I said to the empty hallway. I turned the handle. The mechanism clicked. The door swung open on hinges that didn't creak. Pierce must have oiled them sometime in the past 3 years, maintaining the house even in the rooms we couldn't enter. The room was exactly as Eleanor had left it. The bed was made crisp white sheets and the blue comforter she'd insisted on buying because it matched the curtains. 2 pillows on my side, 3 on hers because she liked to read propped up before sleep. The morning light coming through the east window illuminated dust motes floating in the still air. I stepped inside. The hardwood floor felt solid under my feet, real, present. Her dresser stood against the far wall, its surface covered with the small objects of a life perfume, bottles, jewelry box, hairbrush with a few silver strands still caught in the bristles-framed photograph of Pierce's college graduation. I walked to the dresser and picked up one of the perfume bottles. The cap was off. I didn't remember it being open when I'd last been in this room. The scent had faded, but I could still detect jasmine underneath the staleness. My hand trembled slightly holding it. I realized Celine had never entered this room either. She'd lived in this house for 8 years, free to go anywhere, yet she'd respected this boundary. Or maybe it wasn't respect. Maybe even she understood that some doors once opened revealed too much truth. Easier to let the dead stay sealed away than risk encountering them in their own space. I set the bottle down and turned to survey the rest of the room. Her novel lay on the nightstand, a mystery she'd been reading that final week. Bookmark still tucked at page 217. She'd never know how it ended. Her reading glasses sat beside it, frames folded closed, waiting for eyes that would never use them again. Her slippers stood beside the closet, worn leather, comfortable. She'd pad around the house in them every morning, making coffee, reading the newspaper at the kitchen table, her feet tucked up under her in the chair. I sat down on the bed. The mattress compressed under my weight, same as always, memory foam conforming to my shape. I placed my hands flat on the comforter and felt the texture of the fabric. Smooth, cool, real. This was where she died. October 27th, 2021, early morning. I'd been in the shower. By the time I found her, she was already gone. Heart attack, the emergency responders said. Quick, painless. They were lying about the painless part, but I'd accepted the lie because I needed to believe she hadn't suffered. But she had suffered. For 6 months. Every chest pain, every racing heartbeat, every hospital visit where they couldn't find the cause because they were looking at natural deterioration when the truth was pharmaceutical murder. I closed my eyes and waited for the usual images. Eleanor clutching her chest, gasping for air, dying alone while I stood 30 feet away behind a closed bathroom door. The images didn't come. Instead, I remembered her laughter. The way she'd throw her head back when something genuinely amused her. The way she'd hold Pierce as a baby singing off-key lullabies that made him stop crying anyway. The way her hand felt in mine during our evening walks along the Charles, small and warm and certain. I remembered her reading to Pierce when he was 8, doing different voices for each character. I remembered her at my retirement dinner standing to toast me, saying she was proud to have spent 40 years watching me serve justice. I remembered her alive, not dying. I opened my eyes and looked at the nightstand. The drawer handle gleamed dully in the morning light. I pulled it open. Inside reading materials, hand cream, a sleep mask she never used, receipts from bookstores, a small leather notebook where she kept lists, and underneath it all, a photograph. I lifted it carefully. The image showed Eleanor holding Pierce when he was maybe 3 years old. Summer day. Backyard. Both of them laughing at something off camera, probably me, probably taking the photo badly. The joy in the picture was almost painful to look at. I turned it over. Eleanor's handwriting, faded blue ink. The two men of my life hold on to each other. My throat tightened. She'd written this years ago, probably slipped it in the drawer and forgotten about it. But the message felt deliberate, intentional. Like she'd known somehow that Pierce and I would need this instruction. That someday we'd need to be reminded that we had each other, that grief could be shared, that holding on was both a choice and a necessity. Maybe that's what her memory had done these past 3 months. Guided me, reminded me, held on when I couldn't hold myself. I folded the photograph and tucked it into my breast pocket close to my heart. I stood and walked to the door, paused, turned back. Thank you for telling me what to do, I said to the empty room. I finally listened. I walked out and left the door standing open. The hallway felt different, lighter, like something heavy had finally been set down. I descended the stairs, Eleanor's photograph, a gentle weight against my chest. Pierce was in the kitchen when I entered. He looked up from the coffee maker, registered something different in my expression, but didn't ask. I took a mug from this cabinet and poured myself coffee. Then I poured a second cup and slid it across the counter to Pierce without either of us speaking. A new routine forming, 2 men holding on to each other. The trial started in 7 days. The last time I sat in federal court, I sat in the gallery, not on the bench, and that felt exactly right. 7 days had passed since I opened Eleanor's door. 7 days of December cold and early darkness. 7 days of Pierce and me learning to exist in the same house without the weight of investigation between us. We'd fallen into routines, morning coffee, quiet dinners, evening news, watched side by side on the couch where Eleanor used to read. Now we sat together in the Boston Federal Court Gallery waiting for the procedural hearing that would confirm what everyone already knew. The courtroom looked different from this angle, smaller somehow, less imposing. For 30 years I'd viewed it from the bench-elevated position, commanding view, every face turned upward toward my authority. From the gallery the proportion shifted. The bench seemed farther away. The judge human-sized rather than monumental. It felt right. I wasn't here as an arbiter of justice. I was here as a husband whose wife was murdered, a father whose son nearly died, a citizen trusting the system to work. The procedural hearing was assigned to a different judge, one I knew far more personally. Judge Margaret Hayes entered through the side door. 48 years old, sharp features, dark hair going gray at the temples, black robe pressed and precise. She'd served as my law clerk 20 years ago when she was fresh out of Harvard. Brilliant legal mind, compassionate heart, exactly the kind of person the system needed. I'd written her recommendation for the federal bench when she applied 8 years ago. She took her seat with practiced efficiency and called the court to order. Her voice carried authority without aggression. I recognized the tone I'd taught her, that how to command respect through competence rather than volume. I watched her settle into the chair where I'd sat for 3 decades and realized the system was continuing without me. The principles I'd tried to uphold, fairness, precision, compassion tempered with justice, were being carried forward by people I'd trained. Justice wasn't one person. It was a relay race, and I'd passed the baton years ago without quite realizing it. The thought was humbling and comforting in equal measure. Catherine Boyle stood to address the court. She presented the prosecution's motion to maintain detention without bail, flight risk, danger to witnesses, overwhelming evidence. The arguments were familiar. I'd heard versions of them 10,000 times. Your Honor, Catherine said, the defendant purchased one-way international tickets, initiated asset liquidation, and made statements to cooperating witness Conrad Travers indicating intent to flee jurisdiction permanently. The risk of flight is not theoretical, it's documented. James Rothman. Soline's public defender stood to respond. He looked tired. He knew he'd lost this argument before he opened his mouth, but he had to try anyway. That was his job. Your Honor, my client maintains her innocence. House arrest with electronic monitoring would be sufficient to— Denied, Judge Hayes said. Defendant Soline Pennington shall remain detained without bail pending trial. Flight risk is established by clear and convincing evidence. Catherine moved to the next item, Conrad Travers' sentencing recommendation. Guilty plea to conspiracy charges. Reduced sentence of 6 years federal imprisonment eligible for parole after 3 years served in exchange for full cooperation. Mandatory psychological counseling upon release. Permanent prohibition from any cybersecurity work involving vehicle or safety-critical systems. Conrad sat at the defense table beside his attorney, head bowed, hands folded. He'd surrendered everything to the FBI and testified before the grand jury. He'd live with what he'd done for the rest of his life, but he wouldn't go to prison. That was the deal. That was justice trying to balance punishment with redemption. Judge Hayes reviewed the recommendation, her face neutral. Mr. Travers' cooperation was substantial and materially advanced the prosecution's case. His remorse appears genuine. The court accepts the recommendation. 6 years federal imprisonment with parole eligibility at 3 years psychological treatment upon release, employment restrictions as stated. She picked up her gavel. The sound when it struck, sharp crack of wood on wood, echoed through the courtroom exactly the way it had every time I'd made that sound. Same acoustic, same finality, same declaration that the decision was made and the law had spoken. But I heard it differently now. Not as a judge marking the completion of judicial process. As Eleanor's husband, Pierce's father, a man who'd watched the system work from the other side and found it still capable of delivering what it promised. The hearing concluded. Judge Hayes dismissed the court. People began gathering papers and standing the usual post-proceeding shuffle. Pierce placed his hand on my shoulder. Brief touch, steady pressure, and we stood together. Judge Hayes caught my eye from the bench. She gestured slightly toward her chambers. I nodded. Pierce and I made our way through the side corridor. Hayes met us at her chamber door, robe already removed, looking younger without it. Russell, she said, shaking my hand. Then to Pierce, Mr. Pennington, I'm glad to see you're well. Thank you, Your Honor, Pierce said. Hayes turned back to me. You taught me that justice isn't about revenge. It's about restoring balance and protecting those who need protection. Today proved you still believe it. I never stopped, I said. I know, she smiled slightly. That's why the system worked. You trusted it even when you had every reason not to. We left through the main entrance. The December afternoon had turned to early dusk, 4:30, and already dark. Snow had begun falling while we were inside. Light flakes drifting down through the streetlights, dusting the courthouse steps with white. Pierce stopped at the top of the stairs and looked up at the sky. It's snowing. Mom loved first snow. I remember, I said. He reached over and adjusted my coat collar, which had folded wrong. You're getting sloppy without Mom, he said, but there was affection in his voice, not criticism. I felt Eleanor's photograph in my breast pocket, the weight of it familiar now. Her message still there, hold on to each other. I realized I was smiling. Not the careful smile I'd worn in courtrooms for appearances. Not the grief management smile I'd practiced for 3 years. A genuine smile. The first one since October 18th when I'd watched FBI agents lead Soline away. Pierce caught it. His expression shifted surprise, then relief, then his own smile forming. Yeah, he said quietly. Me too. We walked down the courthouse steps together, snow gathering on our shoulders, Boston's lights coming on in the winter dusk. Behind us, the federal courthouse stood solid and permanent, the machinery of justice turning its next increment forward. Ahead of us, whatever came next, whatever we'd build from the wreckage. We walked toward the car, father and son holding on to each other the way Eleanor had told us to. Christmas Eve arrived with snow, and I heard the sound I'd been waiting for, Pierce's laptop hitting the bottom of the trash bin. 9 days had passed since the courthouse hearing. 9 days of December, growing colder and darker. 9 days of Pierce and me settling into the rhythms of a household that had lost one member and was learning to function with two. We decorated the mansion for Christmas, not the elaborate display Celine had insisted on in previous years, but something simpler. A tree in the living room, white lights along the staircase, Eleanor's favorite ornaments, the ones she'd collected over 40 years of marriage, hanging where we could see them. I sat on the front porch in one of the wicker chairs, wrapped in my winter coat, holding a mug of hot cocoa that Pierce had made. The snow fell steadily, blanketing Beacon Hill in white silence. Christmas lights glowed in neighboring windows. Somewhere down the street, a family was singing carols. I heard the side door open, footsteps on the porch. Pierce appeared carrying his laptop, the device that had started everything. The laptop he'd left charging in his study the night Celine thought he was asleep. The laptop that had recorded her voice, her plans, her confession to Conrad. The laptop that held evidence of 18 months of conspiracy. He walked past me without speaking, descended the porch steps, and crossed to the trash bin at the curb. He opened the lid, held the laptop over the opening for a moment, then let it drop. The sound of metal and plastic hitting the bottom of an empty bin echoed through the quiet street. Pierce closed the lid, wiped his hands on his jeans, and climbed back up the porch steps. He sat in the chair beside mine and picked up his own mug of cocoa. "Don't need it anymore," he said. We sat in silence for a moment, watching the snow fall. Our breath created small clouds of steam in the cold air. The hot cocoa in our mugs sent up wisps of vapor that disappeared into the darkness, transient warmth in the winter night. "Dad," Pierce said quietly, "do you regret everything that happened? The investigation, the trap, all of it?" I looked at him. His face was half shadowed in the porch light, but I could see the question was genuine, not rhetorical. He needed to know. "Sit down," I said. He was already sitting, but the phrase was habit, the invitation to real conversation that Eleanor and I had always used with him when he was young and struggling with something difficult. He smiled slightly, recognizing it. "I'm sitting." I looked out at the snow-covered street, at the Boston lights glowing through the winter darkness, at the city where I'd lived my entire life, practiced law, served as judge, raised a son, buried a wife. "No," I said, "I don't regret it." Pierce was quiet, waiting. "But I wish I'd suspected sooner," I continued. "I wish I'd seen the signs when your mother was alive. I wish I'd questioned the heart episodes, pushed the doctors harder, examined the pharmacy records 3 years ago instead of 3 months ago." My voice stayed steady, judicial precision, even in personal pain. "I don't regret catching her. I regret not catching her soon enough to save Eleanor." Pierce's hand found my shoulder. His grip was firm, steady. The same hand that had gripped my shoulder in the courthouse gallery in the FBI office in my study the night I told him what we'd discovered. "You couldn't have known," Pierce said. "I should have," I replied. "I was a federal judge for 30 years. I spent my career evaluating evidence, assessing credibility, identifying deception. And I lived with a murderer for 3 years without seeing it." "She fooled everyone," Pierce said. "Her law firm, her colleagues, me most of all. I married her. I loved her. I trusted her with my life. And she tried to take it, but she didn't." Pierce's voice was quiet but certain. "Because you saw what the rest of us missed. Because you built the case. Because you trusted me enough to tell me the truth instead of trying to protect me from it." I reached into my breast pocket and pulled out Eleanor's photograph. I'd carried it every day since I found it in her nightstand drawer. The image of her holding 3-year-old Pierce, both of them laughing, her handwriting on the back. I handed it to Pierce. He took it carefully, turned it over, and read the message. His lips trembled. "The 2 men of my life hold on to each other." He looked up at me. "She wrote this. Years ago, I found it in her bedroom drawer 2 weeks ago. She knew," Pierce whispered. "Even then, she knew we'd need each other." "She knew," I agreed. "Even before you were born, she knew you'd be a good man. She was right." Church bells began ringing in the distance. Old North Church 3 blocks away. The sound carried clearly through the cold air, 12 strikes marking midnight. I realized it was Christmas Day, December 25th, 2024. 3 years and 2 months since Eleanor's death. 3 years and 2 months of grief and investigation and rage and finally justice. 3 years and 2 months, and for the first time I felt peace instead of pain. The bells finished their count. Silence returned, broken only by the soft sound of snow falling on snow. "Keep it," I said, nodding at the photograph. "You sure?" "I have 40 years of memories. You have this. Hold on to it. Hold on to what she wanted us to be." Pierce folded the photograph carefully and slipped it into his own pocket. We sat watching the snow fall on Beacon Hill, on the street where I'd brought Eleanor as a bride 42 years ago, where we'd raised Pierce, where we'd built a life. Sometimes justice comes at the right time, swift and certain, arriving exactly when it's needed. Sometimes it comes later, after loss and pain and the slow accumulation of evidence. Sometimes it comes too late to save everyone. But love the kind Eleanor gave us, the kind that wrote messages to be found years later, the kind that reaches across death to guide the living. Love never comes late. It's always exactly when it needs to be. Present, persistent, patient. Pierce leaned his head against my shoulder. I felt the weight of him, solid and real and alive. My son, Eleanor's son, the man we'd raised together to be exactly who he was. We sat in silence watching Boston's lights glow through the falling snow, Eleanor's photograph between us, her love still holding us together. No further words were needed. And to you listening to my story, remember this. Sometimes the people we trust most are the ones capable of the deepest betrayal. I spent 30 years as a federal judge believing I could spot deception anywhere. But I missed it in my own home. I lived with my wife's murderer for 3 years. Don't make my mistake. Don't assume that love or family automatically means safety. Trust must be earned continually, not assumed eternally. Question what feels wrong even when it costs you comfort. This story isn't really about a father's revenge, it's about a father's responsibility. When someone threatens your child, you don't just react with anger, you act with precision, you build a case, you trust the system even when it failed you before. My son and I survived because we held on to each other exactly as Eleanor told us to. I believe God gave me those 30 years on the bench to prepare me for the 12 days that mattered most. Justice delayed isn't always justice denied. Sometimes a father's revenge is simply refusing to let evil win. Now I want to hear from you. What would you have done in my position? Would you have gone to the authorities immediately or built the trap like I did? Leave a comment below. I read every one. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to Father's Vengeance for more stories about justice and truth. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time means everything to me. One final note, while certain details in this story have been fictionalized for storytelling purposes, the lessons about trust, vigilance, and family are very real. May you never face what I faced, and may you always protect those you love.